encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. If you want to be a serious Bible student, a successful servant, and a powerful preacher, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. My name is Robert Hatfield, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things preaching and ministry. We have come to the end of our season, but we're going to do it in two parts. And so you have this week's episode and the next episode, the Lord willing, where we're going to be sort of summarizing, constructively reflecting how does this help us and where are we going from here kind of conversations. And it seems I love to do that sort of thing at the end of the year anyway, but it seems especially appropriate to do it at the end of this year. Takeaways from 2020. We have that colloquial phrase, hindsight is 2020. I think we will probably stop using that after the year that has been. We will see. Here to help us discuss this today is our brother Mike Vestal, who is joining us once again from Midland, Texas, where he serves the West Side congregation. Welcome back, sir. It's an honor to have you here.
It's great to be here. It really is. Looking forward to the program.
Do you think we'll stop using hindsight as 20? I just think we don't want to return and relive it, even in memory.
One of the things that I found out during all of this with COVID is it's still hard to get over our traditions. So I suspect that we'll still say hindsight is 2020.
What a deep statement you just made there, and rather springboarded, loaded, however you want to put that. I like that. The number I was just telling you before we began recording, what I'm hearing the most from those who are listening to this podcast, and frankly, I'm not happy to hear it, but I'm encouraged that I'm not the only person feeling it. And it is how difficult this year has been. Blessed, yes, there have been blessings, silver linings, but this has been a challenging year for ministry. And it's just everything's been turned on its head. We often joke that, preaching schools or university programs could not have prepared us for ministry. Nothing could have prepared us for 2020, that's for sure. I guess, can I begin by asking, has that been your experience? And shall we commiserate a moment or two together?
Well, I don't think any of us are just looking for sympathy as preachers. But I had never really been able to say I felt like Jeremiah. But 2020 has caused me to feel more like Jeremiah. Now, I could have related to him before in some ways, but you think about 2020 and life in the pits, pardon the expression, and it's so easy to have gotten discouraged and to have felt overwhelmed by everything that we've been dealing with. So, yes, I've been preaching for 40 years, and I can honestly say that I have never felt or experienced as trying a time in as many different areas, trying to stand up for the Lord and fight the good fight on a number of different fronts. I felt that more in 2020 than in any other time in my preaching.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of episodes between this season and last about issues like that, everything from focusing on caring for yourself and making sure that your bucket is full and your relationship with the Lord is what it ought to be, and so on. So I encourage our listeners to go back and listen to some of those if you have not already done so. Definitely challenging, and I appreciate what you said. It does seem like, and I'm only just now sort of stopping to think about that retrospectively, we've had doctrinal challenges, challenges to unity. I won't bring up the different debates that we've all had over this year, COVID-related and non-COVID-related. After all, it was an election year. In some ways, it still is. And, things from the standpoint of, an increased workload, or maybe you're doing the same work, but it takes a little more effort because you have to preach it into a camera lens and then turn around and find a way to upload it and you lose it and you have to turn around and re-record it all over again. Attacks on every side this year, it seems.
Yes, Robert, I think that's well said. And if preachers are tired and discouraged, that only makes sense. I mean, again, we have personal lives. Most of us are married. Most of us have families. We still are concerned about them. We're trying to help elders, if we have elders, through a very difficult time as they oversee God's people. And we're trying to keep lines of communication open. We're trying to deal with dissenters. We are trying to communicate well with others. We're trying to master technology to a greater degree so we can reach people better. There's just so many different fronts, and we have many of the same problems that everyone else does in the pew, plus several more because of the positions that we're in as men of God.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not over yet. I kind of thought that when we reached December of 2020, we would, maybe be talking about lessons like this, but looking forward to a decided difference in 2021, and perhaps we will get there eventually if the Lord wills. But at least for the first part of it, it seems like we may be in the same trenches that we've been in up to that point. Maybe we're just a little more accustomed to them than we were in March or May or August or whenever you started this journey as well. So you have something to add to that?
I just wanted to say to all of those preachers in training, or those of us that have been preaching for a while, but yes, we're still in training. If you are discouraged, and if there's some way that we can talk with you or help in any way, please find someone that you can talk to. If you'd like to contact Robert, if you'd like to contact me personally, please just let this program know and we can make that happen.
Absolutely.
I realize just how devastating discouragement can be, and preachers are not immune. I really believe that what we're facing now is an epidemic of discouragement and depression among good leaders of God's people, and we need to encourage each other and help each other draw closer to God.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, amen. Preachers at thelightnetwork.tv is the email address that you can use if you'd like to reach out, and even if you'd like me to pass your thoughts and comments or your contact information on to Brother Mike, I'd be happy to do that as well. And yes, don't feel as though you're supposed to be able to juggle all of this on your own without at least some support, reaching out, and sometimes just talking about it with other people is freeing, even if you don't come to any conclusions or changes from that. It's good to do.
That's right.
We want to take a little bit of time on this episode, and the Lord willing, you're planning to come back on the next episode, and we're going to sort of continue or piggyback off of today's discussions. But we're focusing today, right, on takeaways from 2020 and just some lessons that we can learn. Is that sort of the direction we want to go today?
That's exactly what I'd like for us to do, to just look at some takeaways. I don't see that there's any sense in wasting a pandemic, in wasting the opportunity that we have to draw closer to God and maybe help others draw closer to God as well during this difficult season. God is faithful, and we're going to have tribulation in this old world, but we can use tribulation and even a pandemic and an election year and all of the other things that have brought together this perfect storm of circumstances. We can use all of that to assess our ministries and draw closer to God.
I love it. So today we're talking about 7 takeaways. After all, it is the perfect number. 7 takeaways.
Indeed. It is indeed.
7 takeaways from 2020.
And there is method to the madness, Robert, and to those who are viewing the program. When we talk about takeaways from 2020, really I wanted us to think about ourselves as ministers, as preachers, to make our calling and election sure, to examine ourselves whether we're in the faith, And I want to be intensely personal with these 7 takeaways because
Mm.
as I think about 2020, I've not always done as well as a Christian man as I'd like. And I've certainly not done as well as a man of God
Mm.
as I'd like.
Wow. Hmm. The personal aspect, and I was thinking as you mentioned that just a few minutes ago, this year, I guess, because in a sense we've all been through it together, but we've all had to deal with it in our own individual ways, and I think it's affected different people in different ways. Perhaps as preachers, it's affected us as preachers of the gospel in a unique way from others who are not preachers, maybe preachers and elderships and deacons,
Yes,
all together. Um, so I'm thankful that we can take this personal route. This has shaken a lot of us, myself included, in some ways, caused us to reevaluate some things, driven us to deeper Bible study on certain things that I've said. I assume I'll never take for granted assembling on the Lord's Day. Now I say that, you know how quickly we forget, but I hope I will not ever take that for granted again. Just some things you
right,
never thought would be a reality that have been, and as
right.
you say, that challenges us personally. So I'm looking
I
forward to
just
being
hope that as
challenged.
I share these, that others can really relate
Yeah.
to the things that I'm going to be talking about as takeaways. I suspect that many will. In these 7 takeaways from 2020, takeaway number 1, I want to be more patient and understanding with the ignorance and frailties and weaknesses of others.
Hmm.
2020 has been the year of fiery rhetoric. 2020 has been the year of polarization reaching epidemic proportions. I think
Yeah.
about takeaways from 2020, and I want to be more patient and understanding, even with the ignorance and frailties and weaknesses of others.
A lot of people have taken some time to contemplate the passages like Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. Some folks went that way with the mask debate, and I don't know that wearing a mask or not wearing a mask is on the same plane as eating meats that were sacrificed to idols. There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect there for me, but the principles there are definitely the same, and
Absolutely.
yielding to others and those sorts of things.
And how we view one another.
Mm-hmm.
So important. Uh, Again, the polarization, I think of be angry and sin not,
Yeah.
Ephesians 4:26. That is probably a passage that many of us who preach have struggled with more than once in 2020 because we're dealing with the ignorance and weakness and frailty of others.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly want them to be patient and understanding of us when we're the ignorant ones and the weak ones and the frail ones.
Right.
So it seems only right that as men of God, I take this away because sometimes I have allowed my temper to be anything other than Christ like
Mm-hmm.
in expressing itself.
I've often thought over this last year, people are responding in the ways that they are because they're kind of scared. I mean, we all have been, whether we're scared of the virus or not. We're kind of scared of losing our norms. You know, we don't like change as a people in general. And
I,
I don't know. I guess I've just thought it took me a little while to come to this point, but I guess I've just thought we're reacting out of fear, and that's the reason why we're spewing out all this stuff and
mm,
dividing and polarizing and that sort of thing.
I love the word that you just mentioned. We're reacting.
Mm,
We are not responding
yeah.
always with the spirit of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're reacting, and again, we're just reacting to the weaknesses and ignorance, maybe, and frailty of someone else, their fears, which we ought to at least try to be sympathetic toward, even if they may be wrongheaded ultimately.
Mm, yeah, that's a good point.
So that's my first takeaway. And it just seems to me to make a lot of sense if every child of God would seek to be more patient and understanding. of the frailty and weakness and ignorance of others and show more the Spirit of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
we would navigate these difficult times much better.
Mm. Well,
Takeaway number 2,
seems to
whenever
make
you're ready.
sense. I am ready for it. Yeah. I'm just
Takeaway.
thinking, and I'm thinking we're probably going to get this with all these. I guess I should have known this before, right? I mean, you're right. That's a perfect takeaway and one to which I can intimately relate. It should have been there in 2019, I guess, as well. So perhaps I'm grateful that 2020 is teaching me that lesson.
And that is exactly right, because in the furnace of affliction,
Hmm.
we are made to rethink, more seriously contemplate and meditate upon God's will, and it gets really personal.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see things in ourselves that may not have been quite as obvious to us before.
Mm-hmm.
We get to see ourselves as God does with his perfect vision when we see ourselves overreacting to others
Hmm.
who may just be afraid, who may just have misunderstandings, and who may just need a shoulder to cry on for a while.
Yeah.
Here's the second takeaway.
All right.
I want to be able to comfort and assure the hurting even when I am hurting too.
Hmm.
In 2020, many of us who preached have preached with a limp.
Hmm.
We have all known someone that got COVID-19. Likely, we all have known someone that was put on a ventilator. We may well have known someone that has passed away. 2020 has been a year of losses in many ways. Graduating from high school and getting to stand in front of a crowd, graduating from college, birthdays where you had a lot of people, anniversaries, funerals that could never be held in a more public way because of social distancing and the protocols.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do everything I can to be more assuring and comforting to people who need it, even when I too am hurting.
Mm-hmm. Is the essence of that? I've been thinking about this a lot. Is the essence of that, or the path to do that, mere selflessness? I mean, do you just have to deny yourself and focus on others, maybe as Jesus did, following that example? I mean, is that really? I don't know if I want to say is it that simple, but is that the essence of ministering to others' hurts, even when you're hurting at the same time?
I think that you're barking up the right tree.
Yeah.
To me, whether I am hurting or not, people still need ministry. They still need ministry to be ministered to.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found myself blessed and comforted and encouraged by countless people, whether they were preachers or elders or not, through the years when I was down and hurting. And I want to be there for others. I think about every man of God that in the New Testament, a Paul, a Peter, they all knew something about hurting. And they did not waste those times of hurt becoming self-absorbed.
Mm-hmm.
They continued to do the work of the Lord. They continued to look to him for strength. What I believe that comes out of all of this for me positively is I do not view myself as being sufficient or adequate.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe every now and then in ministries, we can think, well, we've got a pretty good handle on things that are going. My sermons are coming along pretty well. My classes, I've been making some really good visits. I've had some great Bible studies. Some good things have been happening. Getting along well with the leaders of the congregation. And then a year like 2020 comes along. And it makes all of us very much aware of our great need for God and our great need for one another as God's family, so we can help and encourage each other during these tough times.
Yeah. All right. So I want to be able to comfort and assure the hurting, even when I am hurting too. What's the third observation or takeaway?
Third observation, I want to have more of Christ's heart of compassion in reaching out to others, but especially in reaching out to those that are the dearest to me.
Hmm.
I want to have more of a heart of compassion. When I think about this, I think about Matthew 9:36 and how Jesus was moved with compassion when he saw the people. I don't see how we can watch the news and not feel compassion for people who have lost loved ones. We and especially to our own families and those that we're closest to show a heart of compassion.
Hmm. Absolutely. Um, to the ones that are dearest to you, you say that. Elaborate on why you phrased it that way in particular.
When you feel overwhelmed and when you feel overworked and when you feel like you're just weighed down with a lot of stress and concerns, sometimes that becomes very obvious by the way that we respond to our families,
Hmm.
that we respond to the people that we're closest to. It's kind of like, hey, I am so busy trying to help everybody else. Are just one more person that needs to be added to the list? But the fact is, those of us who are preachers, again, we have families,
Mhm.
we have loved ones. And during a time like this, one of the best things that we can do is show the compassion of Jesus, not just to the people that we preach to
Mhm.
in local settings, but especially to our families. And for example, I'm an only child and my mother is still alive. I preach in West Texas. She lives in Northwest Mississippi.
Hmm.
Contact with her during this time has been difficult.
Mhm.
How one tries to make contact and to relate to family. Mom, I'm sorry, I just can't deal with you right now because I've got too much going on in the
I
congregation. Oh,
see.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
Now you follow?
Yeah, I do. And I'm thinking for those of us with families and maybe younger children, as difficult as this year has been for us as ministers, there's a sense in which, even though confidentiality and otherwise certainly is in play, but they've been right there along the ride with us, whether they were in the passenger seat or maybe a few rows back. Nevertheless, they've been on the same ride. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I was thinking a moment ago when we were doing virtual worship, so to speak, and I was here when it was just right when it all began at first. And, government was saying, it may not be best to meet and whatever. And the elders were trying to figure out what to do. And so for a while, I was providing a live sermon at a specific time that accompanied other, aspects of leadership of worship that we were streaming on the internet. But I was here by myself. My wife was not wrestling because my two children are angels, but anyway, that she was there with them, and that was difficult for her. That weighed on her, and too often I was thinking more about woe is me and the fact that I preached to an empty room and how hard this must be on myself, and I wasn't thinking so much about what it must be like to virtually be a single parent during a virtual worship service.
I love the way you put that because all that this does is help us to become more compassionate,
Mm-hmm.
be kind one to another, tenderhearted. Ephesians 4:32. The whole idea has to be showing more of the compassion of Jesus to everyone, but making a special effort to show it to our loved ones, our
Mm-hmm.
families, most of all. How many times have we preached the light that shines brightest for Jesus shines brightest at home?
Mm.
Well, I've been a dimwit sometimes in 2020. I have been a big dummy sometimes in 2020,
Yep.
and maybe there are some other preachers out there, or elders, or Bible class teachers,
Mm-hmm.
preachers in training, that you look at things you've said and done while you were trying to help everybody else, and you were a dimwit at home.
Uh, that Mike Vestal token crystal clarity today.
Yes.
A
Tell
dimwit
us
at home.
plainly, please, Mike. Tell us plainly.
That's right.
Okay.
What's our fourth takeaway today?
Fourth takeaway. I want to remember that when I am alone and overwhelmed, when I feel alone and when I feel overwhelmed and that the weight of the world is on my shoulder, I am not forsaken and that God is there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fourth takeaway.
I love it. I'm thinking about a sermon series for 2021 on the concept of being never alone, and I'm focused on that, frankly, from some of the things that I've learned so far this year. I'm still planning it. I don't have it, but I want to focus on those promises of God, right? Hebrews 13:5-6, of course, Joshua 1:8, and all the way through. You know, whether you're with Elijah in 1 Kings 19 or just wherever, this idea of, you know, He's with us, and
That's right.
particularly in our moments of, you know, casting all your cares on Him because He cares for you.
Absolutely. 1 Peter 5 and verse 7. You know, I think in the Lord's church, we talk about the Lord's presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that we believe in it theologically.
Mm.
But circumstances like we've been facing in 2020, we need to have a more practical experience of the fact, okay, we're going to feel overwhelmed sometimes, and we're going to be people that we may feel like we're alone and we've got the weight of the world that's on our shoulders, but God is still there. And we try sometimes to take a position that's not ours.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is the one who's borne the weight of the world on his shoulders, the weight of the world's sin.
Yeah.
We need to lean on him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're really getting practical with the presence of the Lord in our lives.
Amen. There have been several times this year when I've needed to just stop. I sort of committed with myself. I wasn't going to get on social media for a little while because that was sort of toxic to me for a little while. It's not always that way, but it was during that particular moment this year. And frankly, I had other things I needed to do, but there were just a few moments when I needed to close the door and open my Bible and just recharge, even if it were just a quick 30-minute top off to help me get through whatever else was going on. I think to that point, you know, plugging back into the power, the source that and the presence of God that helps me to keep going.
That's so well said, very wisely said. The thing is, we are not going to be able to help others in a time like this on an empty tank ourselves. Mm-hmm. And one of the most dangerous things that preachers can often do is we let our tanks run very, very low before we refill.
Yeah, that's right.
These circumstances are going to help with that. You're going to have to make sure, though, that you're frequently filling your tank with the presence and the goodness of God, or you're going to feel weighed down and stressed beyond your ability to deal with.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I want to remember when I'm alone and overwhelmed, I'm not forsaken.
Not
ready
alone.
For number 5, right?
Number 5. All right. This relates to what we just talked about. I want to watch my appetite and better consider my intake. You know, you mentioned social media. Watch your appetite and carefully consider your intake, because you can get too much of a good thing. And sometimes with social media, you find yourself getting too much of a not so good thing. Even the news. Again, you can be so overcome with distress by watching the news sometimes. Think about your appetite, think about your intake, and make sure that you are really taking in God and His Word Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Colossians 3:16. Man shall not live by bread alone. We know Matthew 4:4. But what I'm getting at is this. We're being bombarded with so much information. And a lot of the information from the election to COVID, whatever, can be very distressing. We need to fill our hearts, feed our souls, our appetite. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall be filled. We need to fill our hearts with the things of God. Can't help but think of Psalm 34 and verse 1. May have been one of the least practiced verses by many members of the body of Christ during this pandemic. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise will continually be found in my mouth. I'm not happy when I think about some of the things that I've said in 2020.
Wow. You know, for a while, I justified continual intake and even what seemed to be 24/7 monitoring of the news cycles, whether that be watching it or reading it on the internet or monitoring even Twitter. And I did the same thing for Facebook because there was a period of time where the primary mode of ministry seemed to be either over the phone or through social media.
Right.
And it took me a while for hard-headed me to realize, hey, listen, yes, maybe those are the areas where you're connecting with people, but maybe it's time to come apart and pray a while and then return. Yeah.
Exactly. And we've all preached this and taught this. How many occasions were there when Jesus was so busy with ministry, he just had to stop and go someplace and pray?
Yeah.
What a lesson for us.
That's
what a
right.
lesson.
All right. Number 6.
Number 6, I want to get to the finish line. And I'm sure all those that are listening to the podcast do too. I want to get there, but I need to be more aware of the fact that in getting to the finish line, there's going to be wear and tear and wounds that come along the way. I want to get to the finish line, but one of the things that we preachers do about the finish line is we act as if we are all going to get there. And we think of 2 Timothy 4 out of context almost. I have finished the course. I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. Well, where is Paul when he writes this? He's in jail. Where is Paul when he writes this? He is in a place where most of his friends have left. They're doing the Lord's work. Demas has left him for the world. Where's Paul when he writes 2 Timothy 4? He's cold and he would like some of the necessities of life, like a coat and like some books and like some writing instruments. Where's Paul when he writes, I'm going to get to the finish line. I finished the course. I'll tell you where Paul is. He's opposed by Alexander the coppersmith, and no one in the church at Rome stood up for him when he was on trial. That's where Paul was. Does that sound like, man, I'm just going to sprint on him to the finish line? He's running, but there are wounds, and there are the elements of wear and tear on his heart and body and soul, as this soldier has fought for the King of Kings.
So if I'm feeling wounded and torn and a little broken, you're saying that's kind of par for the course.
Amen. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how many of us will get to the finish line in a sprint. Some of us are going to stagger. I think of Moses in Numbers chapter 20. In Numbers chapter 20, you'll read of the death of Miriam. You'll read of the death of Aaron. And it's also in Numbers chapter 20 that Moses sins by striking the rock rather than speaking to it. And as a result, he is taken by God so that he can see the promised land. But really what happens is shortly after, Moses dies. I'm saying that Moses, as great a man as he was, he sort of staggered to the finish line.
Mhm.
For all of the wonderful things that he did, and for the way that he showed the strength and the power of God. When he got to the finish line, he wasn't sprinting. He was kind of stumbling a little toward the end. And maybe you and I will have that kind of wear and tear on us too, because we are human beings.
Mm-hmm. May not be pretty,
Right.
but it's
But think of
finished.
all the people throughout the Word of God. Remember
Right.
Hebrews 11, of whom this world was not worthy.
Mm-hmm.
In getting to the finish line, they had to face some very real difficulties, and it took its toll on them personally.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I looked it up. Some were sawn asunder, you know,
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it's a bloody, sort of grotesque description, but
Mm.
victorious nonetheless, faithful, righteous, hope in the midst of some of that.
That is correct. So we have this idealized view of getting to the finish line, and we think of that final kick. And again, I would hope that you be the type of person, if you're listening to the podcast, that's you, the final kick. But some of us have stumbled and faltered along the way in getting to the finish line. And it may be that we have cuts and contusions and aches and pains. But if I have to stagger to the finish line, but I get there by God's grace, that is what matters.
Yeah.
And it's what matters for all of us.
By God's grace being the key there, right? I think sometimes too we give maybe unintentionally the impression that, you know, we finish strong because of our own grit, you know, or
That's right.
our own determination or perseverance. And Paul says, I choose to glory in my weaknesses. Maybe certainly influencing our interpretation of 2 Timothy 4 even further, deepening it at least. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, number 7.
Number 7. 2020 has given me this takeaway. I want to commit my all to God. Most of all, my heart and soul. I want to commit my all, my time to God. I want to commit my all, my love to God. I want to commit my all to God, my finances. After all, a lot of people have taken a pretty sizable hit financially this year, 2020. And yet the work of the Lord still goes on. I want to commit my all to God, most of all my heart and my very soul.
Wow. Yeah. The number of people who have been hurting, you know, you said I want to minister as a hurting person to hurting people earlier. But preachers too, you know, I think some preachers have wondered how long the church is going to be able to support them. If you're a missionary and you're listening to this, a preacher on a mission field, perhaps you felt as though your work has been on some congregational budget's chopping blocks. It's been a tough year, but the idea of committing all and spending and being spent, as Paul puts it, for the gospel,
and investing in others. You know, the way that things are in the economy now, it is the time for Christians who have exercised some wisdom and good judgment and good stewardship over the years to really invest in people and to invest in ministries that will benefit the body of Christ and will bring souls to Jesus and save and strengthen them long after we're gone. So those missionaries that you're talking about that may be worried about support, it's the time for some of us who are Christians to think about, let's do something special for them. We may not be rich, but we can do something special to encourage them so that they keep on keeping on for Jesus. And that's what I'm talking about. Again, we commit our all to the Lord, The words of that old hymn, "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross," the last verse, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all.
Hmm.
Now, Robert, did you
Yes.
jot these down? Did
I,
you jot these down?
I do have them. I have them right here in front of me.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you did.
Yes. Okay.
Let's review them together. Let's review them together. You give the 7 takeaways, give the takeaway, and then stop for just a moment.
Okay. So one at a time, right? I'll pause in between each
Please.
one. All right. Number
Sure.
1, I want to be more patient and understanding, even with the ignorance and weaknesses of others. That's the way I
Then
phrased
said
it.
Jesus, then said Jesus,
Mhm.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Hmm.
Luke 23:34.
All right. Number 2, I want to be able to comfort and assure the hurting, even when I am hurting too.
Jesus said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, today you shall be with me in paradise. Words of comfort and assurance when he was hurting to someone else who was hurting.
Hmm.
Luke 23:43.
Number 3, I want to have more of Christ's heart of compassion in reaching out to others, especially to those who are the dearest to me.
Jesus said, Woman, behold your son, and son, behold your mother. John 19:26 and 27.
Number 4, I want to remember that when I'm overwhelmed, I'm not alone.
Matthew 27, verse 46. Then said Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, the Trinity wasn't broken in Matthew 27:46, but Jesus felt as a human the weight of all the sin that he was bearing. And he cries out to God. And he cried out to God so you and I will know that we are never forsaken when we cry out to God too.
Number 5, I want to watch my appetite and carefully consider my intake.
John 19:28, I thirst. Jesus, no doubt, was thirsty after all of the blood that he lost at the cross. Jesus, no doubt, was thirsty, but even more, he was thirsty for communion and fellowship with God. What about our appetite? What about our thirst?
Number 6, I want to get to the finish line, even though there will be wear and tear and wounds that come along the way.
Jesus cried out, it is finished. John 19 and verse 30.
And number 7, I want to commit my all to God, most of all, my heart and soul.
Jesus said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Luke 23 and verse 46. Preachers, it takes a crucified man to declare a risen Lord. And we learn much about how to do ministry and how to live our lives by focusing on our Master and Savior, Jesus.
Wow. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith.
Did you see that coming, Robert?
I did. I got to tell you, I did not see that coming. But
There's a word that we use for that at Bear Valley when I'm teaching.
Yes.
You know what the word is?
Paya!
Paya! It's a paya moment.
I didn't know. I love that. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of Hebrews 12:3. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Of course, that's right after he says, "Looking to Jesus" in Hebrews 12:2.
That's right.
Wow. No, I did not see that coming. But whoa, am I thankful that you presented it in that way and took us right to Jesus and really to his very cross. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you for being a part of this episode, Season 12, Episode 14 of Preachers in Training. There's one more still yet to come in this season as we sort of continue this conversation, but I think in the next episode we want to talk about 7 desires of every heart. Isn't that our little teaser for next time? So looking forward to that, and I'm grateful that Brother Mike is going to join us again on the next episode of Preachers in Training. I want to be sure that you don't miss it, and the way to do that is ensure that you are subscribed to the podcast so that each new episode is automatically pushed to your device. You can also find us on YouTube by searching for Preachers in Training and hit that subscribe button, and as they say, ring the bell. That way you're notified when there are new episodes that are released. Of course, thelightnetwork.tv is our website. Preachers@thelightnetwork.tv is the email address. If you'd like to reach out, either per the invitation that was mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, don't persist in what you're doing, feeling as though you're alone and discouraged. Reach out for the help that you need. And in addition to that, if you've got comments or episode suggestions for the future of this podcast, we would love to hear those at that same address. Thank you so much for being with us today for Preachers in Training. Brand new episode releases next week, and so I want you to be sure that you're watching for that. But until then, I'm Robert Hatfield. Let's go preach the word.